Hello everyone, so for today I'm making a tutorial on how to make these pressure switches and moving platforms. Awesome, so let's just jump into it. Alright, so we're going to navigate to our content drawer and we're going to create two new blueprints. So we're going to create an actor of type B underscore moving platform tutorial for today's tutorial, and we're going to make one also for the pressure switch. So also an actor B underscore pressure switch tutorial. Alright, so let's get those opened up and moved up here. Awesome. Alright, let's start modeling our pressure switch. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to come over to add components and we're going to add a cube component. And we're going to call this base plate. And we're going to come over here to scale on the right side where it says details, and we're going to go over to, we're going to make sure it says 1 on X, 1 on Y, but for Z, which is the height, we're going to make it a little bit smaller. We're going to say 0.1, and that's going to be our base plate. So we're going to come over here to stacked mesh and change it over to be a SM Schaefer cube. And then we're going to change the material to something cool, something basic. Why don't we say basic floor? Why not? And that's our base. So we're going to make sure we still have default scene root selected and not base plate. We're going to go and add another cube. This is going to be our switch. So over here, back to scale and details, we're going to change it to be 0.9 for the X and Y. You notice how this makes it a little bit smaller than the actual plate. And we're going to change this to be 0.2. So that way you have a little bit slight more thickness than the actual base plate. And then we're going to move this up to, let's say, about here. So I have that set to 13. You could have it set to wherever you feel like is a good depth inside your base plate. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to change the static mesh to be a Schaefer cube. And then we're going to change the material to, why don't we say, material for just gray. Gray. Why not? We have a nice, very flat colored switch. Awesome. Okay, our next step is our switch to have collision. We're going to go over to add component and we're going to add in a box collision. In this case, we're going to make the scale a little bit bigger. So we're going to say 1.3, 1.3, and then we're going to say 0.5 on the Z. And then we're going to move this up to be about here, just so that it's sticking out of the top of the pressure switch, so that way when you place something on top of it or step on top of it, it'll depress, like in our demo. Okay, one final step before we start working on the basic moving platform is we're going to come over to variables. We're going to click plus. Here, I'm going to select a B underscore pressure switch tutorial. And we're going to select object reference. And we're going to name this variable item to activate in camel case, just like that. So this is going to allow us to either activate or deactivate the moving platform from within the pressure switch's event graph. Now we're going to come over to the moving platform and we're going to create a box, same thing that we did for the pressure switch. We're going to create a new cube and we're going to name it platform. And this we're going to make a little bit big, but thin. So that way it has enough room for the player to stand on. It's 2 to 0.2 for me. Also going to make this an SM Schaefer cube. And then I'm going to apply a fun rope texture. And that's going to be our platform. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually create a custom event. And we're going to call this pressure switch activated. So when a pressure switch gets activated, we should take the pressure switch's active and get actually a getter for it. And then we're going to make an incrementer of an integer and pass this in like this. So that way, when we call this event pressure switch activated, it will add 1 to our pressure switches active. So here, let's set up the rest of our switch logic. So I'm going to grab our pressure switches needed and get that, and we're going to do a comparison. We're going to say if our pressure switches needed is, or our pressure switches active, excuse me, is greater than or equal to our pressure switches needed, then we're going to do something else. So what are we going to do after that point? Well, that would be allowing us to say, hey, let us continue on and move the platform or not move the platform if it's false. So here, we're going to copy this logic again, but instead of a plus plus, we're going to have a minus minus. So I'm going to break that node, and I'm going to get a decrement int, and I'm going to pull in the pressure switch is active so that it minuses by 1 and triggers this branch. So this branch is going to be the same thing as this, just also having this additional check on what? Well, if we're going to make another custom event that says pressure switch deactivated. So that way, both when we have enough pressure switches to get a platform moving, it will start to move, but when we take away switches active, it'll stop moving afterwards. So the question is, what are these branches going to feed into? Well, in this case, we're going to use a timeline to help define how our platform moves. So we're going to add a new node, and we're going to say timeline, and we're going to click add timeline. And this, we're going to call it platform movement. Awesome. So we're going to double click on this, so that way we can open up the timeline editor, and we're going to hit add track. So here, we're going to add a new float track. So in the time, I want at time 0 it to be 0, and at time 2 it to be 0. So I'm going to add new keys. So I'm going to add a key here, add a key there, and make sure the timing is actually appropriate. Awesome. And then here at 1, I'm going to actually go to 1, 1 and set a time like that. So the idea is that when you activate the track, it will move a platform to its end position and then back to its starting position. So that way we could always stop and start a timeline from any point in the time, and it should loop flawlessly. Okay, so I renamed the track to platform position, and I'm going to come back to the event graph to set our branch conditions. So when either of these are true, we should play our platform sequence, because that means that the pressure switch is active is greater than or equal to the pressure switch is needed. So we should play our track, not play from start, because we want to have the ability to stop and start the track from any point in the timeline. So for false, we're just going to say stop. We're not going to reverse it. We're not going to reverse from end or play from start. That way, whenever the switch gets activated, it'll resume from its last position in the timeline and continue moving. Continuing on, we're going to now get the output from our timeline. So this is going to be a float from either 0 to 1. So this is why we set those integer parameters before, because now we can determine how far a platform is going to go. So movement length. So we're going to get this movement length variable, and we're going to take the platform position, and we're going to say multiply, and multiply these two together. So the way we're going to handle modularity here is we're going to have that integer movement direction like we had before, like the other parameters, and we're going to use this to do a switch on integer. So this is a type of branching that will allow us to, depending on the selection, it will, so like 0, 1, 2, 3, it'll do different items. So this way we could say if we set the direction to 0, it can move in the x direction, 1 in the Y, 2 in the Z, something like that. So let's start implementing this. So out of the 0, we're going to pull off a node, and we're going to say set relative location. And you're going to see there was a option to say for platform, so we're going to do that. So we're going to say set relative location for platform. And it automatically grabs this getter here. And here, I'm actually going to say split struct pin, so we could get all 3 elements like that. So that way, when we say, hey, on 0, let's only move the X. So let's copy this over. So we're going to do this again for Y and Z. And then let's line this up. So for 1 and 2, it's going to be Y and Z. And that's our moving platform. So let's move these back up so we can format this a little bit better. We're going to make a comment around this. This is our switch counter. And this is our direction and length. This is our mover. And that's our timeline. So now I'm going to move this way, move that way, and everything together in a platform mover, or moving platform, I should call it. Awesome. So that's our finalized moving platform. So we're going to hit compile and make sure we save it. And we're going to start moving back to pressure switch. So we're going to navigate over to our pressure switch class again, and we're going to create 2 new events. We're going to say actor begin overlap and actor end overlap. This is where it's going to trigger our moving platforms counter events that we created previously. And since we have that variable to reference here, that's exactly how we're going to do it. All right, so we're going to make sure our type here, or variable, is public and editable, because for every switch, we want to be able to tell it what moving platform to be able to activate. So we're going to make sure this is a platform type, so a B moving platform tutorial. We're just going to click, and here we can now get, and now we could say pressure switch activated on overlap, or pressure switch deactivated on end overlap. From here, we're going to do a very similar thing that we did in the moving platform. We're going to create a new timeline. So we're going to type in timeline and hit add timeline. And here, I'm going to call it button depress. All right, and when it's activated, it's going to play. And when it's deactivated, I'm going to hit reverse. So unlike before, where we had it do play from start and reverse like that, or no, play and just stop, now it's play and reverse. So going back into our viewport, we're going to select our switch, and we're going to see that at its default, it's at 13. And we're going to select a height that we like for when we want it to be depressed. So more. Actually, why not here? Because that way it's not really sticking out of the bottom, and it's depressed sufficiently for the top. So that way we could say 13 and 3 is our 2 points that we want to have for our depress here. So I'm going to double click on the timeline. I'm going to add a float track, and I'm going to call it button position. So I'm going to add a key here. So at time 0, I want it to be 13. And then let's say I want this to take 2 seconds to complete. Actually, no, 1 second. Why not? We're going to add a key here. And we're going to say at time 1, we want to set this to 3. And I'm going to scale this appropriately. And then now, when we have this played as it runs, it's going to depress from 13 to 3, because we're going to get the output of this track and use that to set the position of our switch. So to do that, it's very similar to how we did the moving platform. On update, we're going to say set relative location. And you see how we have the different aspects in our scene, but we want to move the switch. So we're going to say switch. So it's going to break this off for us. And I'm going to just deconstruct this pin. And that way, when we say button position, it's going to be our Z. That way, when it gets activated, it's going to move the Z from 13 to 3, and then when it reverses, because it gets deactivated, it'll go from 3 to 13. Awesome. So that is it for our button pressure plate. So let's organize this a little bit better. So this is our event colors. This is our timeline. And this is our button depress. So I'm going to move these a little bit out a little bit more. And then pressure switch. Awesome. So now that we have everything all nice and built, we're going to make sure that we save and compile both of these. And we're going to come back to our level. We're going to go into our content drawer. And we're going to place down a pressure switch. And then we're going to place down a moving platform. One thing I forgot to mention, in the moving platform class, you do want switches needed to be public, and movement direction and movement length to also be public. So make sure you switch those on and compile before trying to link up these two classes together. So coming back into our level, I'm going to select on the pressure switch, and it says in default platform to activate that public variable we had before, and I'm going to select our B moving platform tutorial. And just to confirm I have the right one, I'm going to hit select in viewport. So it's going to bring that over here. And here, it's going to say, oh, we have our variables pressure switches, movement direction, and movement length. So I'm going to set that to 1 to be 1 pressure switch needed. Movement direction, I'm going to say 2 because I want it to move up. And let's say 100 units. And that should be good. Something very important to make note of is in the moving platform, make sure you actually set the length of the track to be only 2 because we have it be 2 seconds and turn looping on. And for the pressure switch, make sure the length is 1 because our depress animation takes 1 second. Okay, let's demo this out. So I'm going to press play. I'm going to run over to where we placed our little demo area. And if you see in the grass, I'm going to step on the pressure plate, it goes down. I get off it, it comes back up. And you will also see the platform will start and stop moving whenever I get on and off, and stay in its position until I step on again. And this also works with any actor that is generating collisions. So this cube does have collisions turned on, and if I press it on top, the button will depress, and I can move up and down with my platform. Alright, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and I hope you're having fun with Unreal.